Do you know the world is a foul sty? Do you know if you ripped the fronts off houses, you'd find swine?
I don't want you to touch my mother. So go away, I'm warning you. Go away or I'll kill you myself.
Welcome to the 28th episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
It's great to be here again. The world seems to be in ever greater chaos. We are actually recording this podcast under very stressful conditions of the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. As you know, Poland is a neighboring country to Ukraine, so we are constantly reading the news about the war, and we are also witnessing a huge surge of migrants coming to Poland as we speak, literally as we speak. I allow myself to mention this because ever since we started this podcast, we always tried to stress the Eastern European perspective in our looking at Hitchcock. We also traced some broadly speaking Eastern European motifs in Hitchcock's works, so it's also important to us to mention this, that now we are actually talking at a time when this part of the world is in a deep crisis. So, having said that, we are proceeding to discuss a film called Shadow of a Doubt from 1943. So the film has the special distinction of being called repeatedly, although not entirely consistently, a personal favorite by Hitchcock. Hitchcock many times stated that this is his favorite film. At times he denied it. He said that other films that he made were his favorites. For example, in the famous Hitchcock Truffaut book, he actually says, no, it isn't my actual favorite. Anyhow, he said it often enough to consider it, at least, as an interesting fact about Shadow of a Doubt. This is a film that is celebrated by many as one of the finest achievements by Hitchcock. It was made under the logo of Universal Pictures, and its chief collaborator was Thornton Wilder as one of the screenwriters, and we'll also speak a little bit about this because Hitchcock went out of his way to stress how crucial Wilder's cooperation was. He even gave him a special credit in the opening credits, apart from his screenwriter's credit, which is quite unusual. But the main thing to say at the beginning is that this is a Hitchcock thriller. It's definitely a thriller about a serial killer played by Joseph Cotten, freshly off Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. He plays Uncle Charlie, who comes to a little town of Santa Rosa, California to visit his family, his adoring family, the chief member of which is Little Charlie. Charlie, young teenager played by Teresa Wright, who idolizes her uncle and who doesn't suspect that he is actually the killer. As she slowly unravels the mystery of his true identity, the true thrills begin, because we are beginning to fear for her life as well. Sebastian, how did you like Shadow of a Doubt, which I assume you saw many times before?
Yes, maybe not that many times, but I revisited this film just now, just to talk with you about it. And of course, I did additional research, and I know that when I was watching this film as a teenager, I didn't know that it may have so many, let's say, dimensions when you're watching it as an older person, more mature. For me, it's one of the most unsettling of Hitchcock's movies. But at the same time, the one in which he doesn't cross the line, let's say, of obscenity, of being an ugly director, and a mean director. This is something that really strikes me in this film. Maybe this is one of the reasons why so many people like it. And you mentioned that there is this saying that it's supposedly Hitchcock's favorite film. His daughter, Pat Hitchcock, she recently died. She also mentions that one or two times in a video about making of the film. And I think one of the reasons why it has such a high and important position in the Hitchcock canon is because it doesn't have this meanness that, for example, Frenzy has, his British film from the 70s, which by the way, I like a lot, and I'm also looking forward to discussing Frenzy. It was always one of my favorite Hitchcock movies, but given the theme of the film, right, it's a story about the murderer, about the serial killer who kills rich widows, elderly widows, and he considers them ugly, useless, spending money on nothing, having good time when their husbands are dead. And, he has this terrible speeches, very striking moments in the movie, but the film itself, how it's conceived visually, doesn't make fun of old women. And for me, that was really striking. It was the thing that really was very surprising to me. Given also the few shots in Downhill, maybe you remember this sequence in a ballroom when the young man is courted by elderly women, and I know that we discussed it, that it's kind of a mean scene on Hitchcock's part. So there's something very clear, pristine in this film in its approach, but also it's very dark. I think it's a great movie to discuss and to go deeper into.
First of all, I entirely agree. I was amazed again by how brilliant this film is. I really, really enjoyed revisiting it. I think it is one of Hitchcock's best. No doubt about it. It has this extremely dark streak. As you mentioned, Charlie is a serial killer with a clear misogynist agenda. He hates women, specifically older women, specifically widows, and he is very vocal about this hatred, especially in one scene at the table when he actually does a little psychopathic rant, which has deep undercurrents of misogyny, also including the pure repulsion that he takes at women's bodies, and it's very, very pronounced. So there's this dark streak, but I think you absolutely nailed it when you mentioned that in this film Hitchcock refrains from his proclivity to actually mock women and to show women, especially older women, in unfavorable light, because this is exactly the reason why the film is actually great. Because had Hitchcock succumbed to his weakness for making those ugly jokes this time, I think he would have produced something deeply repugnant, because Charlie's repulsion has no clear grounds in the world presented in the film. Namely, there is not a single woman in the film who would fit the description that he presents at the table. That keeps the movie in good balance, because otherwise I think Hitchcock would have moved towards the dangerous and unpleasant waters of Frenzy, which by the way I don't like. So I will be looking forward to discussing that film. But here it seems that Hitchcock as a director, Hitchcock as creator of this world that we see on screen, doesn't necessarily partake in Charlie's misogynistic philosophy. With real Hitchcock, I guess the answer wasn't as clear cut. Fortunately, the director of Shadow of a Doubt, as evidence on the screen, he had the good sense not to follow this instinct, which creates this incredible tension within the film between the surfaces and the deep undercurrent of things. The tension that actually Charlie names directly when he says, to young Charlie, what happens when you tear off the walls from the houses? You will see a pigsty. You will see that people are nothing but animals. And by the way, in this little speech in the cafe, he doesn't differentiate any longer between men and women. He actually calls whole humanity putrid and absolutely despicable. So that's also an important point, that in this speech he goes he goes even more epic. He's no longer only against women, he's against humankind. So I think this creates a beautiful tension. And the second and last thing for the moment that I would say is that the film is so beautiful because Hitchcock has such deep respect and love for three female characters in this film. And this is Teresa Wright's character, whom Hitchcock definitely likes, despite recognizing her naivete. The mother, which I think is a fantastic performance by Patricia Collinge. We will mention later probably that it was precisely at this time that Hitchcock lost his own mother. She died when he was filming this film, so I don't want to take this too far, but it is a loving portrait of a mother. And of course, the little girl, played by Edna Mae Wonnacott, who is a comic figure. She's this bookworm sister, but again, Hitchcock deeply respects her because she doesn't fall for, probably is the only one for in this family, for Charlie's tricks. She's not taken in by the trick with the paper. She's not taken in by his suave manner. She's actually the one who doesn't want to sit next to him at the table. And I think that Hitchcock respects this little girl. He actually recognizes her as a very wise child. So the meaning of what I want to say is that Hitchcock had the good sense of putting a counterbalance to Charlie's misogyny by making three key women in the film so admirable and so loved. And this is what creates tension. My problem with Frenzy is that there the female characterizations are far less sympathetic, and this is why the balance is destroyed. But we'll keep that for Frenzy. So maybe let's start with those portrayals of women in this film, or maybe you wanted to comment on what I just said.
Yes, I just wanted to add, I agree with you totally, because I think the reason for that maybe not necessarily Hitchcock's restraint or his reluctance to go into the nasty business, but I think the fact that he was at least partially decentered, as in his many other projects. Of course, he was the creator of this world, but it was a great example, probably the greatest example so far when it comes to his American movies, of a very fruitful collaboration. You mentioned Thornton Wilder, and Hitchcock was surprised, who really enjoyed this collaboration. The Wilder, the esteemed playwright, really was drawn by Hitchcock into this work, into this world, into creating a screenplay. It was pretty intense collaboration, and he was, let's say, humble enough to allow Hitchcock to revise, change the script after they wrote the let's say the first draft. So there are many creators of this story. Of course, the common thing that is usually mentioned in this case is that Wilder, of course, was creator of this play Our Town, right, which was made into a movie in 1940. So a very different in tone and mood, very different depiction of small town America. So we can look at Shadow of a Doubt, of course, as an reverse side or the underbelly of that story of small America, and of course that's one of the most important contexts in which this movie is set. But also I was surprised to discover that Sally Benson was also one of the persons, woman who was who collaborated on this script. And if we remember Meet Me in St. Louis and one of the first scenes when the whole family is tasting ketchup, which, by the way, I think you screened in one of your classes when I was attending it, you can sense the similar approach to portraying family as something maybe quite chaotic, but often lovable and interesting, full of individualities. And that's something I think we, at least to a certain extent, get at the beginning of Shadow of a Doubt. This family is really interesting. It may be quote-unquote typical, and that notion that they are a typical family, of course, is even thematized inside the movie, as the two detectives try to they come as disguised servy men to make a survey of this typical family. But I think there is something very touching in this portrait of a very diverse, a bit of a strange family. And of course, the actress you mentioned, Patricia Collinge, also she's several, maybe not scenes, but several pieces of dialogue are attributed to her as the author. So we see that there were many people behind the story. There was even another writer attributed, Gordon McDowell, who wrote the story, the basis of this screenplay, and Alma Reville is also credited. So I'm not trying to say that, once again, Hitchcock is not important here. Of course he is, but I think there was certain degree of change he could put into the screenplay. I know that you've read this text by Thornton Wilder, and I also know that Hitchcock made it darker as he progressed, right? But I think there is a certain level of darkness that he couldn't let's say he couldn't reach or didn't want to reach. That the basis, which was formed by two so very different sensibilities, couldn't be changed into this nasty story, I think, right? There was this core created by Wilder that probably was pure enough.
Absolutely. Let's not forget that the whole thing originated with this story by Gordon MacDonald, which was actually just the bare bones of a story. It wasn't even finished when Hitchcock started working on it. Yes, absolutely. I did read the screenplay. It was published as part of the Thornton Wilder volume in Library of America series. And one thing I can say is that, first of all, Wilder, he actually enjoyed the cooperation with Hitchcock, but he didn't enjoy some of the dialogue changes that Alma Reville made to the text, because he thought they made it sound too British to his ear. He was very married to this sort of true Americana dialogue, but the other thing is, it would be interesting to know who actually rewrote the key repugnant speech by Uncle Charlie, because I don't think it was Sally Benson. Okay, I mean, Sally Benson probably didn't have it in her, to write something as foul as the speech, because Sally Benson, as you mentioned, 1 year later, there will be a film of Meet Me in St. Louis, in which this sort of cute, idiosyncratic middle-class family is the whole show. At the time when Shadow of a Doubt was in cinemas, already the stories that would found the core of Meet Me in St. Louis were being published in the New Yorker. So Hitchcock definitely knew that she was able to do this. But let me read you just one small fragment from the screenplay by Thornton Wilder, and this is exactly the moment of this horrible speech, the table speech by Uncle Charlie. And just one passage, not the entire speech. Young Charlie asks him about the widows, but they are human beings too. And Uncle Charlie starts saying in Wilder version, "Are they? Barely. And there are some other things best not talk about, gigolos and whatnot." So he also criticizes men in this speech, which Hitchcock removed. "I'm not a man to set himself as better than the next man, but by God, there are certain things I can't stand. But there, forget it, Charlie, you are not eating your dinner." So there is nothing about wheezing animals, about women being like big, fat, wheezing animals. There's about eating great meals and, playing bridge all the afternoon, living useless lives, but not a word about those wheezing animals. So this is something that was added, and I don't think by Sally Benson, rather by probably Alma Reville on behalf of Hitchcock. So that testifies that Wilder didn't want this speech to be as vile as it is in the film, which is interesting, I guess. Probably what we should also comment on is this dynamic between Charlie and Charlie, between the young Charlie and Uncle Charlie, because come to think of it, it's pretty strange idea. What is it about this young girl and Uncle Charlie that straight from the beginning, she says we have this magical connection. You are my twin. How do you read this? Like, what's this idea here?
Yeah, and also when she goes to send a telegram, she discovers that she already got one, and she says almost in a mystical tone, he heard me, right? Which is pretty uncanny. But I think that these strange elements, these elements of something uncanny, they are so, let's say, subtle. They're not forced on us. Because, for example, I'll come back to this idea of a double in a second, but coming back to the speech for a moment, the speech is terrifying for us as viewers, also because Hitchcock uses this impossible angle to shoot Joseph Cotten. Supposedly, we're looking at him through young Charlie's eyes, but she sits in a different place, really. We look at him straight on his profile from this other angle, right? Who's looking at him? Of course, we are, and then he looks almost into the camera, which is also pretty effective and pretty rare, this kind of breaking of the fourth wall, and this very highly scrutinizing close-up makes us really uneasy, but nobody seems to care that much among the people who sit at this table. Nobody really treats this moment as something strange. There is not a pause after his speech. Just his sister says, "Oh, don't say it like that when you'll be giving a speech, right? Because they will tear you apart," something like that. So that's something also really interesting in this film, that there are these moments of something sinister, but they are not really noticed by anybody else besides us, and maybe besides young Charlie in certain scenes. But this idea, yes, I agree with this argument that although this movie is considered a very well designed story, well crafted, the plot has a clear chain of cause and events and so on, I agree that the very fact that he comes back to this family is very irrational on his part, right? When you're trying to escape justice, you don't come back to your family, to your family home, because that's one of the first places when they'll be looking for. So there is this idea of some kind of a force, that brings them together. And of course, it's pretty strange that they both have the same name, and that actually, it's, of course, we'll come back to that when we'll be discussing Strangers on a Train, which is also, of course, begins in this parallel way and so on. But I think what is really amazing for, not only for 1943, I think even today such a plot would be pretty risky, the incest which is there, right there in the movie, coded in visual terms, or maybe not so much coded, right? He's giving her the ring, the beautiful ring, emerald ring, which is, by the way, of course, the property of one of the victims, right? So it's marked as this as a symbol of evil almost, right? As he's making her accessory to murder on one hand, or like marking her, but also it's kind of a scene of engagement in a way, which is very, very perverse. And there are many moments like that in this relationship. So I don't have a clear reading of that, because I think it's also one of these movies that is very open to many different readings. But I think its strength is that we cannot really tell what's going on there. We may have some ideas, you can look at it from the psychoanalytical angle, you can deep into Uncle Charlie's past if you want. But for me, that's not really convincing. I think this is this threshold moment in cinema when we're changing approaches to psychopathic characters, because we have Fritz Lang's M, of course, and Peter Lorre, one of Hitchcock regulars in the 30s, let's say, who's crazy in a pretty unexplained way. We may sympathize with him, but still we don't understand what's going on here. But a few years later, we have a new version of M, by the way, right, by Joseph Losey, which is staged in a very similar setting. It's also, I think, Californian town. And then we have a sick man at the beginning of the 50s, of course, Cold War in a full swing. But at the beginning of the 50s, Joseph Losey chooses to show the serial killer as a sick man. And I think here we are somewhere in between. We may consider Uncle Charlie a sick man. Of course, we know he's pure evil. But I think, although Hitchcock didn't like abstract ideas, I think there is something purely evil in this character, something that really makes us want to go abstract a bit, I would say.
Yes, I agree with this, and I also think that this is an interesting thing, that it's a film that was made during the World War II. It doesn't mention the war at all, yet it would have entirely made sense had it been a story of a Nazi uncle. Like The Stranger, for example, the Orson Welles film. That would make perfect sense. If, Joseph Cotten comes to this town, it turns out that he's a Nazi, that would be probably the best anti-Nazi thriller in the series, that we had, for example, with The Stranger. But here, I mean, who is he really? Of course, this movie could be considered in the context of Monsieur Verdoux, the film by Charles Chaplin, which had a very similar character, only Chaplin actually fully endorsed his killer by saying that, it's actually okay because the world is such a rotten place that, what's a little killer of widows, compared to big dictators. But apparently the real life cases that those two films were based on were quite close. It was actually some cases that Hitchcock knew and Chaplin knew as well. Anyhow, what for me is absolutely fascinating is that, it's a very strange idea with this Charlie, this bond that they have. I think, Hitchcock clears it of any incestuous meanings, but they stay there. There's not a single look in the film that would, for example, indicate that Charlie, Joseph Cotten, has some sexual feelings for young Charlie. He doesn't ogle her. He doesn't treat her in this way. He doesn't say like, "Oh, you're such a young woman." There's nothing like that. So it's very important. But on the other hand, they are framed in the same way as has been commented often. That the first time we see Uncle Charlie lying on the bed in Jersey City is the same way filmed that young Charlie is lying on the bed in her Santa Rosa room. But on the other hand, there's this absolute clash between the urban setting and the suburban setting. Jersey City, the ugliness and the beauty of perfect suburbia, let's say. By the way, this is the Eastern European podcast, so we should mention that one of the very first shots of the film is the famous Jersey City Bridge, Pulaski Skyway, named after Kazimierz Puławski, the hero of Revolutionary War. However, for me, this time when I watched this film, I really focused on what young Charlie, is saying before Uncle Charlie arrives. She's a little philosopher in this family. The younger daughter, she may read a lot, and she reads Ivanhoe, which is a little joke because it's a historical epic, not really suitable for, a child. But she's so precocious, she's reading Ivanhoe. But it's young Charlie who asks philosophical question. What's wrong with us? There's something wrong with this family. We need to fix it. And a short comical conversation between her and her father reveals that she is not lacking in possessions. She's not lacking in anything material. She's lacking in the spiritual energy. She says that this family is dying. We need someone who will renew the family. And the answer to this is Uncle Charlie. And I thought, like, what exactly is it? And she says it in the script even more, that, we were waiting for you. You were what was lacking in this family. And I'm thinking, okay, so what was this family lacking? Like, what is this energy that Uncle Charlie brings with him? And my only idea is extremely vulgar. I think it's the sexual energy. I think that, the father is presented as such a asexual character. I mean, he is avuncular. not Uncle Charlie. The father is avuncular. He's played by Harry Travers, who's so, like gee whiz, old dad, banker. He doesn't really know what's going on. He's not a sexual presence at all. The mother is lacking something. The daughter is lacking something. And suddenly there's this debonair, suave, beautiful young man who, by the way, we see for the first time with a cigar in his hand, right? I think young Charlie says exactly this. This family is lacking the sexual component. There is not a real man in the house. And of course, real meaning sexually active. So, and I think that Uncle Charlie, who comes to this house and makes the mother behave as she's a smitten young girl to her own brother, right? She says, "Oh, I needed you so much. Finally, I'm happy." She's, he treats her as a young woman. He looks at her sister and says, "Oh, I remember you when you were standing in front of our house. You're so beautiful." He sees the woman in her, the physical woman that her husband stopped seeing in her years ago. So I think there's this Freudian family romance going on here, which of course is even more interesting because ultimately young Charlie will have to kill Uncle Charlie, right? Maybe too much of the sexual energy in the household is not a good thing. I don't know. That's just my interpretation that I came up with.
That's a very interesting interpretation, and what I think is the problem also is that, of course, Uncle Charlie is the epitomizing the sexual energy, but also if they think he's able to kind of change that house in that way, of course it's misplaced, because we don't know what kind of sexual energy he has really, right? That's the point here, that we don't hear. Of course, we couldn't receive the information that he was raping these widows and then killing them, right? But since, of course, serial killer movies, stories, it has its own mythology, but I think it's fair to say that under this very sexual surface, and I think Joseph Cotten never looked like that in any other movie. Not only sinister, but he just looks different. I don't know even how to describe it, but he's different in Citizen Kane or The Third Man. Here, even his facial features give a different impression, that. But I think there is something quite not explosive, but imploding in him. So I think in many ways he's impotent, on many levels. And of course, that would be a more traditional psychoanalytical reading, right? That he's repressed, he's trying to release his sexual energy in a different way, by killing these women, by associating himself with evil. But I think what you said is very important, because of course we have a double quasi-incestual relationship, right? Of course, not only Charlie and old Charlie, but as you mentioned, the way scenes with mother are staged, it's also very, very telling. And her last moment, right, when she cries in public that he's leaving, it's very moving, but it's also very, very strange. And the way that she's almost naive to the point of, being ridiculed when she doesn't really comprehend what he's saying. And also, I think the problem with sexuality goes beyond that particular household, right? Because we mentioned that we don't have shots of, let's say, nasty, ugly women, for example, in Rebecca at the very beginning. The whole point of the story is to let a young woman live without this older lady who's like, taking her juices out of her life, because she's such a terrible creature, this spinster, or I think she's a spinster, not a widow. But here we have a newly created widow, right? I mean, this woman who is quite attractive, and she's a, let's say, freshly made widow. Her husband died recently. She appears in a bank, and then she follows, she almost stalks Uncle Charlie, which of course is funny in itself, because she appears in the train at the end, ready for fun, ready for adventure, right? I think they're going to San Francisco or something, right? So she's there, and of course the promise that she sees in Uncle Charlie is sexual. So I think in this sense your reading is great. I think there is something to it, and of course, if we agree, just the last point, that Uncle Charlie replaces sex with murder, then we have this relationship between the father and his friend, right? Which is also quite, it's a, let's say, homosocial bond they have, discussing murders all the time, right?
I completely agree, but you just made me think of something, is that, and I think you actually made my reading complete in a way, because yes, there is something very strange about how Joseph Cotten looks in this film, and I think he's this is crazy, because this goes into like impossible determinations, but I don't think he's sexy at all. There's nothing in him that would he's suave, and there's this radiance to him. He seems to be this perfect bachelor material, but there's not a single scene in the film when you would look at him and you would think like, oh yeah, this is he's a very sexy man, or no, there's something is off, something is strange, as you said, that perhaps perhaps is impotent. That's one reading of it. Perhaps he's homosexual, and perhaps this is something deeply repressed, and the misogyny. That would be a very stereotypical reading, but I don't think not that alien to Hitchcock. But the interesting thing is also that there is not a single man in the film that would be conventionally fully attractive, I would say. Even the policeman, the sort of romance that is going on between the policeman and the young Charlie, nothing is happening there. It's so chaste, and there's no energy between those two. And by the way, I made an interesting mistake this time when I was watching the film, because there's this shot of the policeman who is directing traffic at the streets of Santa Rosa, this whole sequence of presenting an ideal community, which I think David Lynch parodied later in Blue Velvet, and I think Steven Spielberg also paid a little homage to it at the beginning of Jaws, when he is presenting Amityville. It's exactly the same series of shots, the same staging of this perfect community. And I looked at Policeman, and I thought, for the first time in my life, I thought, oh my God, it's a woman. I thought it was a very old policewoman who was directing the traffic. It wasn't voluntary on my part. I just thought, oh my God, it's an older lady. And then, of course, it turns out that it's a man. But he's very, rotund. He has those very, very, very soft features. So for a second, I was mistaken that it's older lady policeman who is doing this. It's of course my mistake. But when you remember that, Charlie speaks about, those fat women, and who had problem with weight? Of course, Hitchcock had problem with weight, right? He didn't control his urges, and he became extremely, by the way, from what I read, he was at his fattest, at his most obese when he was making this film. So it's very strange that Charlie admonishes women for getting fat at the time when Hitchcock's body becomes extremely big, and when he also becomes, woman-like in his shapes in a way. So I would say that would be an interesting Freudian reading just there. But just one more thing to finish this line of thought is that my ultimate reading of young Charlie is that she's extremely brave young woman. She's extremely brave because when she discovers the truth about Charlie, she reads this piece of newspaper in the library. She doesn't escape, she doesn't run away, and the most important thing, she starts to confront her uncle. There's this incredible scene at the dinner when he keeps telling his stupid jokes, and little Charlie or the girl Charlie starts to attack him with irony, saying that, oh, maybe this time you wouldn't need to play little tricks with your newspaper. This is like, tempting the murderer. I mean, she knows at this time that he's a murderer, but she's not afraid of him. She actually confronts him. She's taunting him, right? So this is very interesting. In this way, she is actually a version of him, meaning that she has the strength actually to confront him. And she's not just, some Victorian parody of a woman that we know, for example, from The Lodger, right? Or from Blackmail. Then when she's, attacked, she immediately escapes and, she's helpless because that's what Victorian era wanted us to believe about women. She's actually confronting the rapist. She's confronting the aggressive male. And I think this is something that Hitchcock probably saw in American women of the time, of the 30s, the strong American woman that, of course, the American cinema of 1930s celebrated, the women who were in the workforce during the World War II. So I think Little Charlie also presents a break in Hitchcock. She's not, of course, we know those adventurous women in Hitchcock, like from the thriller period, but this is a very young woman who wasn't trained in the ways of the world. She's still a virgin. And yet she has this extreme courage to not only confront her uncle, but ultimately to kill him.
Yes, and you feel that she wouldn't be on the same page with the main protagonist of Rebecca, right? That she wouldn't understand why that other one, that Rebecca protagonist, is so shy and reluctant to...
And suspicion.
Yes. So that's very interesting, and also what you say is very fascinating about the role of young women. I also would like to point out to the other double, so the friend of our heroine, of young Charlie, which we meet in one of my favorite scenes in a sleazy bar, which I think is really... It's a Lynchian moment in the sense that they enter like a parallel dimension, when suddenly in the Santa Rosa we have a bar that, I've never thought I will enter this bar, and it's like a different world. It's like of course everyone says it's like a noirish bar, but there is also suddenly this waitress whose style of acting is totally different from the rest of the cast. Like you mentioned the British humor that we have inside the house. We have this highly mannered Joseph Cotten and very sensitive Teresa Wright, and here we have this waitress, and she's like really maybe the most nihilistic person of them all, right? I mean,
she escaped from the world of Edgar Ulmer. She could serve hash browns in Detour.
Exactly. I wanted to mention Detour. Exactly. So she went places, she saw things and stuff like that, and she says she could die for a ring like that. And the way it's staged, that's also the scene when we see soldiers in the background. In this cafe. I think that's really something pretty amazing that he inserts this scene in a movie that otherwise takes place in this pretty conventional middle American places like library, like a hall, church, the square, and so on. And so I like this scene a lot, and I would say that yes, I also found this reading that this movie is a kind of is a film that reflects the emerging culture of teenage girls, the culture that will transform to a certain extent post-war American society. And also, you're right, in when it comes to reversing the woman gothic structures, it's also interesting that in most of these stories, women are suspecting something that doesn't turn out to be true. But here, of course, it does turn out to be true, and she, at one point, she threatens her uncle that she will kill him, which she does or does not at the end, right? So I agree that she's brave, but also the important question is about the closure of this film, right? Because I agree that this the romance with the policeman, it doesn't have really this carnal element. Also, he's kind of patronizing towards her. I think he doesn't understand what she went through. I think he has no idea. Maybe nobody has, right? We as viewers, we know that Uncle Charlie was a very unique person in his life. We see how she's trying to discover what's going on and how she takes it up emotionally, right? She's crying at one moment, which is staged in an interesting way because she's looking at the sky and crying, which is like almost melodramatic. But also it's a film when Hitchcock he cuts pretty fast. He goes into the blur, or there's a transition pretty fast, so these elements don't really stay that long with us. But what will happen next, right? I mean, will she find a place in this Santa Rosa community? Because she seems to be a person that goes far beyond this community in her approach to life, and so on. So I think that's the question one of the questions this movie leaves us with.
I fully agree. I also think it's a film that we won't be able to exhaust in this conversation, because literally every other scene begs for some commentary. I would probably just point to two extraordinary moments when camera follows Uncle Charlie up the stairs and he feels the look of the Teresa Wright character on his back, and he looks down at her and he sees that she is watching him. I think that's an incredible moment, because he actually feels physically that the woman who knows his secret is watching him. And the other incredible shot you mentioned, when he's speaking this awful tirade and he looks at us suddenly, that takes us to Rear Window, I would say, and the moment when Raymond Burr suddenly looks at us, and he also killed his wife, right? But one another moment is that when Uncle Charlie sawed off a piece of a staircase, an outside staircase, and little Charlie tripped, and she trips, and suddenly the camera pulls back extremely fast, and we see Uncle Charlie, who for a second looks at her just to make sure if his trap worked or not, and then he disappears. And it's so funny because the trap is stupid. I mean, Uncle Charlie didn't have any guarantee that, little Charlie will be the one going down the stairs and that she would do anything to herself. So this is terrible idea, this whole thing. Script-wise, it's stupid. But in visual terms, it's make perfect sense, because he is literally waiting for her to die, right? He wants to see the moment. He wants to see the moment. And this is exactly what Hitchcock is doing in his films, right? He is torturing those female characters so often. I mean, we will go to The Birds, right? When he will just put Tippi Hedren in front of the door and attack her with dozens and dozens of birds, right? Just for his visual pleasure. And I think this is when Hitchcock reveals himself. He is the Uncle Charlie who looks at Teresa Wright. Oh, did she hurt herself? No, not this time. I have to try another way. So I think that's also self-referential. Let me just read a very short joke from the autobiography of Dmitry Tyomkin, a Russian composer who emigrated to Hollywood, and he in the 50s he published his memoir, Please Don't Hate Me, and The Gay Confessions of an Unpredictable Musician. So it's 1950s title. And he composed the music to this film, and he did a brilliant way of rearranging the Merry Widow Waltz, which comes back in the film often. And he says that Hitchcock says about himself, "Some people eat and some dine. I dine." So he was dining, not eating.
That's perfect.
Yes, so that's perfect. I live by this maxim.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that when Tyomkin was at the test screening, he thought the movie was a failure because people were laughing during the film. There were a lot of laughter. And he went to Hitchcock to a restaurant and he said, "Hitch, this is terrible." He says, "It's calamity, Hitchcock, audience laughing." "Oh, that... it was quite all right," says Hitchcock. "But Hitch, when should be fear, terror, they going, haha," says Tyomkin. and Hitchcock says, "That was tension, Demi. The laughs were a sign the picture had them on edge." He explained that the American audiences will break into nervous laughter when they are overwrought, a good sign for a suspense picture. So Hitchcock knew that when Americans were laughing at his thrillers, they were doing so to relieve the tension, which explains, I think, why Psycho also, in my experience, is a film at which people are laughing many times, because they also want to relieve the tension. But I could go on forever about Shadow of the Doubt. I don't know what are your feelings.
No, just to sum up, because we have a special treat for you, the second part of this episode. But yes, to sum up, I would like to point our listeners to a monograph on Shadow of a Doubt, which is really impressive in the way it synthesizes and comes up with new interpretations. It's a book from last year by Diane Negra, and she really provides many interpretations, and she touches upon many topics, one of which is the way in which we can read this film as, of course, a fascist allegory, right? As The Stranger by Orson Welles, which was, I think, pretty consciously modeled upon a Shadow of a Doubt, has this theme pretty spoken in a pretty obvious terms. But here, of course, it's submerged somewhere. But think about two things. One of them, we still didn't mention that Uncle Charlie, he's portrayed a bit as a vampire, right? The way he's rising from his coffin, and also this very striking scene in a train when he's traveling in this shaded
compartment,
small compartment, yes, on a train, as if afraid of the dark, and so on. And then think about the bat itself, like the vampire bat, which in Jean-Paul Leve's short film was this allegory of fascism. And think about the Merry Widow Waltz, which supposedly was one of the musical pieces that Hitler liked a lot. And think about the fact that in previous versions of the script, Uncle Charlie was a man who traveled a lot. He says something like that in the finished picture, that he was going around the world since he was a teenager or something like that. So we have this association, this contamination of Uncle Charlie with foreignness, the association of Uncle Charlie with Hitler's favorite music, and so on. And I think even if we don't need Shadow of a Doubt to be a historically specific film, because it goes beyond it, we still watch it and enjoy it, I think it could be more or less palpable to the audience at the time that there were these foreign associations to him, and he was a bit like this, I don't know, phantom of Nosferatu, let's say, right? So I find this interpretation very, very interesting. So if you want more of this type of interpretations, go to Diane Negra's book.
I like this reading a lot. I didn't read the book, so I would love to read it. I think what is missing is a strange accent, because he speaks too well for an American, but I will read Negra's argument. And now we'll proceed to the second part of the episode, and we will have a special guest that Sebastian will introduce you to.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Philip J. Skerry. He taught me a lot about movies. He's a professor emeritus at Lakeland Community College in Ohio. He also taught many other classes at John Carroll University, Cleveland State, and Baldwin Wallace. He also wrote a couple of books about Hitchcock, Psycho in the Shower, which is devoted entirely to the examination of Psycho and its most famous scene, and Dark Energy, Hitchcock's Absolute Camera and the Physics of Cinematic Spacetime. In that book, in Dark Energy, he discusses Shadow of a Doubt in a really unique and fascinating way. That's what we'll be talking about. Please welcome Professor Philip J. Skerry. Hello.
Sebastian, you were my favorite student at Cleveland State. In that tiny class, if you remember, we had about 8 students, and two of whom were just auditing the class. And they were, I think one person was actually older than I was, which is not unusual in a community college or a state university. But anyway, so you kept me going at Cleveland State. I have to say that.
Thank you. That was great. I remember our screening of Dog Day Afternoon, The American Friend by Wim Wenders, right? Those were the movies we were watching.
Yeah, that's one of my... I love movies visually, but I also love soundtracks and the music of films. That's why I love Bernard Herrmann's scores for the Hitchcock films. But the score for An American Friend is one of my favorites. And for the life of me, I can't remember the composer right now. But anyway, yeah, those were great films to screen.
And what is it's probably a very long relationship, but what is your relationship with Hitchcock? How your passion for this director started? Why you decided to devote him to books? Just in a few sentences so that our listeners would know, where do you come from as, let's say, Hitchcock fan?
Well, I think it started before I knew anything about movies, when I just was a viewer, just like everybody else who watches movies. And I was 15 years old when I saw Psycho for the first time. And the way Hitchcock presented the marketing of the film, he was as important as the movie. You couldn't escape them. I mean, I would go to a whole bunch of movies and not even know who the heck the director was or what a director did. So I could see a John Ford Western or a John Huston film. But with Hitchcock, it was Hitchcock's Psycho. You saw an image of him in the ads for the film, and it was kind of unusual to see the director. And this is what he wanted. This is how he presented himself. He wanted the director to be known as the prime creative force in the film, not the studio, not the producer, but the director. And this he learned from his experience with German cinema in the 20s, when he went to Germany to do an Anglo-German co-production. And he saw how powerful the director was, and people talked about the director. So he said, I want people to talk about me. And so I knew Hitchcock before I knew anything about movies. So when I was teaching, I just gravitated, speaking of dark energy, I gravitated towards Hitchcock and thought, why not teach a whole course on Hitchcock? And it happened that just about at that time, Hitchcock's star was rising in the pantheon of great directors. He was considered sort of the master of suspense, this funny guy you see on television. But once the French critics got hold of him in the 50s and 60s and said, he's a very important director. And then Robin Wood said, why should we take Hitchcock seriously? All of a sudden, everybody was talking about Hitchcock. And I thought, I'm going to put together a class on Hitchcock. I think I have enough material. And of course, the films were then becoming available. You have to remember that when I first started to teach film in the 70s, I had to rent, since we didn't have 35 millimeter setups, they were so expensive to rent. I had 16 millimeter films. I had to rent them from film companies, catalogs. And there were just a whole bunch of films that weren't even available. I remember when I was trying to get a copy of, this will blow your mind, trying to get a copy of Citizen Kane to teach. I think the company that had the rights to Citizen Kane at the time, I think it was Films Inc., Films Incorporated, and they had a very thick catalog. I remember I called and I said, I want a copy of Citizen Kane. They said, well, we only have 2 copies available for the whole northeast part of the country. And he said, one of them is not projectable because it has so many splices. I said, well, send the other one. And so when the film I got broke a couple of times as I was watching. I mean, this is what we had to put up with. But when Hitchcock started to become more important as a filmmaker, the films became available. And then, of course, VHS tapes and then DVDs. All of a sudden, the whole canon was out there to use. I mean, now I think you can get all of Hitchcock's films in one form or another. But this was different. That's why some people couldn't teach classes, because you couldn't get the films. I mean, they just weren't available. But now everything's available. This is the time to be a film professor. Yes. That's a long answer to that question.
So you had to be an entrepreneur as well, right? Like,
yeah,
looking for really copies.
And you had to beg and borrow and steal money from the department to teach a class. Because let's say I had a semester class and I had 15 weeks, I might show 12 films. Each film would cost over $100. I'd have to pay for shipping. I'd have to pay for insurance, not me, but the school. And so I'd go with the budget to the department chair and say, I want to teach this class. You'd say, well, all the other classes we teach, and I was in the English department at the time, the students have to buy textbooks, and the course doesn't cost anything. You're telling me that this one course is going to cost $1,200 for you to teach. Now, of course, that's no problem with the technology that's available.
That's pretty amazing, and also your road from these incredibly fresh, I would say, film classes, film studies were developing only, right, in 1960s, 70s, and
yes.
your road from that point, from the emergence of this academic film studies in US up to Dark Energy, which is one of the, and I say it of course as a compliment, one of the most bizarre books about movies I've ever read. It's like, and it's so great that you try to marry Hitchcock with Einstein, film with science. This is something that is really very close to my heart as well. This marriage of science and art, because too many people consider it separate spheres, and you do something opposite in your book. How did you come up with that?
Well, thank you for saying that. A lot of the early film critics came to film through literary studies. So they were interested in character, plot, structure, and they didn't really know much about film. So they had to. I never took a film course. I mean, I was trained in a literary sense. So my first approach to film was, through character, structure, plot, theme. We talk about what's the main idea of this film, how do the characters relate to one another. But I always felt that there was something missing, that there was some element that I wasn't dealing with, that came to the forefront, I think, in that little episode when the film broke and Shadow of a Doubt disappeared on the screen. I realized that you could take a book and burn it, but you'd still have the idea of the book someplace. But if you burned a film, that would be the end of it, So I thought there's something in the technology here that I'm not addressing. The film is more than just character, plot, structure, theme, and so forth. Film is technology, and what's technology but the practical application of science? So that led me to think about the science of cinema. And at the same time, I read this article in my local newspaper about dark energy. I write about it in the book. And I had been thinking about Psycho, and I was kind of mulling over some of the things that I couldn't quite figure out after the shower scene ends, and Norman is cleaning up after his mother kills Marion in the shower. And I thought that scene is just a guy mopping up a tub, wrapping up a body, but it's loaded with energy from the previous shower scene that transfers over into that scene. And so you're so shocked by that scene that the energy from that earlier scene is transferred, but you can't see it. It's sort of in your mind. But now Norman is cleaning up after this horrific act. And I thought, I couldn't quite put my finger on why that was such a powerful. I didn't write much about it in the book because I sort of stopped at the shower scene. That why is that scene so powerful? Because if you just saw it without the previous scene, it wouldn't mean anything. So it made me think about something in this film you can't see, but that is affecting the whole scene. And then I read Dark Energy. That article about dark energy, I thought, first of all, the term itself, dark energy. I mean, it's just it's like Harry Potter, dark energy. And then I thought of all the darkness metaphors and literature and so forth. And then I started to explore it, and I found this online course called Dark Energy, Dark Matter, The Dark Side of the Universe by Sean Carroll, who's one of the greatest astrophysicists. And so I got that program. I watched it. And I said, I have to do something. There's something going on here that I'm not able to quite put my finger on. I'm going to start exploring it. And that's how it started. And I got in touch with Sean Carroll, and I said, I'm thinking of doing this project. Would you be willing to talk to me? He said, yeah, sure. Come on out to Caltech. And so I wrote up a proposal, and I sent it to my editor at Continuum, David Barker, who first looked at it and said, I don't understand what this is, what you're trying to say. You need to clarify it. So I sat down and thought about what I wanted to say and read as much as I could about. Then I got on to Einstein. And there seemed to be so many connections to Hitchcock, not only in the timing, but in the experiences of his. And so one thing led to another. I put together a better proposal, sent it to David Barker, my editor at Continuum, and he said, all right, I'm going to go to the editorial board and pitch this. He said, you sure you can do this if we okay it? And I said, yeah, oh yeah, I think I can do it. And then all of a sudden I get a contract from Continuum with a not a very good advance, but enough money for me to make the trip to do my research. And I said, do I sign this? Can I pull this off? I don't know anything. I don't think I got more than a C in any science class I took in college. I said, can I pull this off? And I said, yes, I think I can, because it's funny. A lot of my ideas I get intuitively. And that's why I like Einstein and Hitchcock, because they said intuition is important. I had a feeling, I knew what I wanted to say. I knew it was in my head somewhere, but I didn't have it fully articulated. And I said, if I could actually sit down and start thinking about this, doing my research, watching the films, looking for these ideas, that I could pull that off. So I did. But I'll tell you, halfway through, I had a crisis of confidence, and I thought, I still have half this book to write. But I kept working at it, kept doing it, and I sent it off, and they Continuum had been bought up by Bloomsbury Press. And I thought, wow, are they going to honor this? But so Bloomsbury said, we'll do it, we'll publish it. And so that's it. And I got another physicist to speak to me too, because I didn't want it to seem as if here is this amateur talking about science without a scientist saying this is a legitimate way to look at things. And that's why Sean Carroll was perfect, because he's got a grasp of how science connects to life and art. And so that's why I used him. That's a long answer, but that's fine. How that idea came about.
I was reading your book this morning because I've read it several years ago when I was studying in Cleveland. I bought it. And what I admire after the several years even more is the way you allow us to look at both physics and cinema in different ways. Using these terms, and as you mentioned, it may sound on the superficial level, it may sound like there is this film studies guy, this film studies professor who's using these hip physicist terms like space-time, quantum energy, parallel universe, dark energy. But it really makes sense here, and you do your best to show us that it makes sense. So, for example, just for the sake of unraveling it a bit, what is the connection, in your opinion, between this term space-time and a single shot in cinema? How would you say, what is the correspondence?
A little background here, the Newtonian universe, which is still, Newtonian physics, classical physics, it's still very useful in determining things in the real world. But Newton said there is space and there is time. They're separate from one another. There are two different dimensions, so that you could have a clock that would just keep ticking away, and you have a space that's over here. Einstein said they aren't separate. They are linked in a way that shows that you can't have space over here and a clock ticking alongside it that will always tick the same way, because if you take that clock and put it into space 2 miles above the Earth, the clock is going to move slower than it is on the Earth. In other words, you can't separate space and time. Then I thought, what is the best example of the combination of space and time in my experience? And that is a strip of film, because a strip of film melds together space and time in one particular shot, let's say, one running of the camera. You can't take the film and say, okay, I'm going to now look at the space of the film, and now I'm going to look at the time of the film. You can't do it. They're both connected together. And that's why I said a shot of film is a perfect example of space time. And of course, that gets you into light. It gets very complicated. But that's how I guess I would put it in filmic terms, that a shot, a continuous running of the camera, is a perfect melding of space and time, and an example of Einstein's theory in practice.
This
so
is,
that
this
does
is
that
great.
make sense?
Yeah, yes, it makes sense. I mean, I'm a bit more clever because I've read the book, but I'm sure our listeners will totally get that. And yes, it's great. And maybe it's a good moment to connect our talk about Hitchcock and physics and space-time with our main dish, let's say today, which is Shadow of a Doubt, right? A unique film in a Hitchcock canon. And I feel that maybe if it's not at the center of your book, then certainly it's one of the key movies, because, for example, the title of the book, Dark Energy, sends us to the main hero, right? You call the Joseph Cotten character from Shadow of a Doubt Prince of Dark Energy, right? You begin your book with the story that you mentioned, that this flammable stock, right? That this film stock burned. It was the movie you were projecting was Shadow of a Doubt, etc. So how do you like coming back and thinking about Shadow of a Doubt? Why do you value this movie so much?
Well, I think it's one of Hitchcock's greatest films, and I wish that I'd like to write a book about Shadow of a Doubt. I thought about writing it. I don't know if I could get back into it. Things have, there have been so many other things written about Hitchcock. I'd have to do so much research. But Hitchcock always said it was his favorite, although some people say he said that about other films too. But there's something very profound about how Shadow of a Doubt links, to me, the essential Hitchcock idea about the duality of human nature, the essential fallen state of human beings, the darkness that's in everybody, that can be brought out by an encounter with what he calls moral evil. And so that got me into thinking, well, what happens when evil overtakes an individual or a group of people or a culture? Things spin out of control. People lose their freedom of movement. They lose their freedom of thought. Things become chaotic and so forth. And I thought, Shadow of a Doubt is a perfect embodiment of that in a little town. I mean, we're not talking about the Soviet Union collapsing or something. We're talking about Santa Rosa, this perfect little California town, and how everything seems so orderly, bourgeois on the surface, but underneath there are these forces that are ready to be brought out, as they are in every human being. This is Hitchcock. He really believed that. And because, why? Because he saw it in himself. He saw it in his urges, in the kinds of films he makes and his fascination with murder. Let's bring murder into the living room where it belongs. You know, I think he saw this as a perfect way to get his ideas across. And he loves, you know, if you want a great film, you know, the more evil the main character, the greater the film. You know, that Hitchcock Truffaut interview. And the more evil the theme, the greater the film. So what could be a better embodiment of that than Uncle Charlie, who is dapper, cultured, sophisticated, but underneath he's Satan. You know, he's an evil character, but he presents himself as the exact opposite. And he comes into the life of his niece and brings out her dark energy, antimatter, and that explodes in violence. That's, you know, underneath the surface, and then it manifests itself in that scene in the train when she becomes the killer. You know, the greatest scene in that film, I think, is the scene outside the house when she realizes who this guy is. And she says in the most and then, you know, this is Teresa Wright, who's just so bright and sparkly. She says, like a film noir, a femme fatale, she says, "I'll kill you myself. You get out of town or I'm going to kill you myself." And, you know, it reminds me of, you know, all the Westerns that I saw where the bad guy says, "I'm going to kill, you know, get out of town or I'll kill you." She said, "Get out of town or I'll kill you myself." And of course she does. She kills Charlie. She doesn't mean to do it, but she does. She throws him off the train, and the audience is so happy to see him crushed by the train coming in the opposite direction. And of course there are the trains. Hitchcock loves trains. So it's just got everything in it, you know. It's got a great cast. It's got his puckish kind of playing around with evil, with Joe and Herb talking about the best way to kill each other. Now, if I were going to kill you, I wouldn't bother with poison. I just hit you over the head with a lead pipe. You know? And you laugh and say, "Wow, these two guys are crazy." Anyway.
It's a bit of I would say, of a British humor, maybe, you know, taken from these British years.
Yes. In fact, during the pandemic, we've been looking, my wife and I look for things to watch on and there's just so much out there, but we love BritBox, Acorn TV, and of course, Amazon Prime, but we love British murder shows. Because, like Murder in Paradise, which is a very Hitchcockian idea, or, you know, Father Brown Mysteries, or the Agatha Christie stuff. And there's always somebody who gets murdered, but it's not grotesque. Some of them are grotesque, but it's always like, "Oh, you know, here we have a small English town, and oh yes, so and so has been stabbed in the back," and then all these characters run around, you know. And this is Hitchcock's. This is how he was brought up. You know, his Cockney sense of humor, his fascination with murder being in the living room where it ought to be. You know, where it belongs.
Yeah. You speak about this movie in a very, very beautiful way, and I wanted to invite you to our podcast specifically. I mean, there were many reasons. One of them being, you know, you're such a respectable Hitchcock scholar, but also because of the way you describe a single scene. I love this analysis of the introduction of Uncle Charlie into the movie. I really think what you did there, how you describe it, how you see this scene as somehow connected with dark energy. I mean, for me, that was a totally different way of relating to Hitchcock movies because of the attention you pay to details. And when I was rewatching this scene, those of you who saw the movie, you know it happens in like third minute of the film, right? There are just few shots of outdoor locations, and then we enter the apartment where Uncle Charlie lies on the bed, and you describe the way in which Hitchcock, by the use of framing, mise en scène, rhythm as well, suggests this idea of something sinister in this character. And when we put this idea of dark energy to it, that he may be this embodiment of dark energy, it really makes him even more sinister in this almost cosmic terms, we could say.
The parallel opening scenes where you have that link, Eisensteinian link. You know, Eisenstein's theory of montage, he talks about intellectual montage, where the shots aren't connected by a location connection or a character, but they're connected by ideas. Those two opening scenes, you know, six shots, I think, in each one, are intellectually connected with one another. And so that brings up the idea of the double, which Hitchcock, I think, knew intuitively about moral evil and the dual nature of human beings. But he got from his experience in Germany and German Expressionism and the doppelganger, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that the right way, but doppelganger, I think works its way through in the connection of those two scenes. And the way Hitchcock goes from, you know, outside to inside, using the window. In fact, I was going to write a book about rectangular shapes in Hitchcock, especially windows, but I never got to it. But anyway, the way he brings the camera through the window into Uncle Charlie and the lighting and so forth. Yeah, I had a lot of fun analyzing that. And I have to say, I owe a debt to an article that I read in one of the French influenced journals, cinema journals. And I wish I could remember the critic's name, but he actually timed the scene and then timed the individual shots within the scene to look at the overall structure of the scene, the rhythm and so forth. It got me, and I did that, and it got me right inside that scene and inside those shots. And once I was inside those shots and I saw how they were connected to one another, I discovered a whole bunch of things. But it was a good experience for me because it made me look so carefully at the film. Now, this is what I couldn't do when I first started to teach film, because you couldn't stop unless you had a moviola, unless you were editing. You couldn't stop a scene, and you couldn't run it backwards and analyze it. You couldn't do a still frame unless you had the right technology. Now, with DVDs, you can look at a scene, you can run it backwards, you can slow it down, you could look at an individual shot. So if I didn't have the DVD and that technology, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And I think we have that advantage now. But it made me look from inside the scene to outside the scene, if you get my sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the movement of Uncle Charlie, Joseph Cotten, if you get a chance, when his back is turned to us and he gets up and he moves over to the window and the light shines upon him, the way he moves, look at the Salvador Dali film, The Andalusian Dog, and look at the movement of the character in one of the scenes. He looks a lot like, he's built like Joseph Cotten, wide shoulders, and he's wearing a suit jacket, and he moves in a certain way. I am convinced, I didn't put it in the book because I couldn't really prove it. I'm convinced that Hitchcock had that scene in mind, the way Uncle Charlie moves. And there, that scene has a sinister quality to it in Andalusian Dog. But anyway, these are the things that happen if you look very carefully at a scene and take it apart and then put it back together again, which is what I tried to do.
And what in a way quantum physics is about, right? About taking things apart, analyzing,
yeah,
more or less, maybe simplifying.
Well, quantum physics, the study of the smallest things in the universe, as opposed to cosmology, which is the study of the largest things. I was fascinated when I looked at Einstein, because, he was interested in the bigger things, relativity and so forth. But his thought experiments and his papers led to the discovery of quantum mechanics, the actual smallest things. And in the world of quantum mechanics, the traditional mechanics, classical mechanics, don't apply, because you can have electrons spinning at similar speeds, separated by billions of miles apart. You could have an electron in one place, and then all of a sudden it's not in that place anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It can be at all the places at the same time. Like you can't measure the position of an electron and its speed at the same time, because if you measure the distance, the speed negates that, and if you look at the speed, the distance negates that. So the world is a strange world, the world of quantum mechanics. And when you get into cinema, there is a strangeness about cinema. There's a strangeness about its effect on what people experience, what they see, that is that can be explained by quantum mechanics. But you really have to explain to the audience, I'm using this as a metaphor. I'm not saying there is quantum mechanics in this scene. I'm saying that if we use quantum mechanics, which is the way the world works in the smallest dimensions, if we use that as a way of thinking about something, then it's valid. Not that there's the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to make that clear in the book. And boy, I got such a bad review. One of the big literary review magazines in England, and an astute reviewer just took me apart.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a ridiculous thing. How can you? And I thought I was going to answer her and say, wait a minute, you didn't read. Let me point out some things I say. I'm using these things as metaphors, as analogies, as a way of combining science and art, technology and art. They're so far apart in cultural discussions. I want to bring them together and say they're not the same, but they're similar in certain ways, and it helps to look at from this to this. I'm way off in the distance here, but you get the idea. Mm-hmm. That it's metaphorical, but it's relevant.
Yeah, I totally get that, and I'll be interested to read this critical review just to see what the points were. But
I'll send you the link to it.
Thank you.
I thought I felt bad about it.
I sympathize. I can imagine, but I know that you consulted your book with scientists, right? I mean,
I did. I had, in fact, Ulrich Rudel and Nandor Bokor. Yes, he's at the Budapest University of Technology. He really liked what I said. Now, he's a scientist and a Hitchcock scholar at the same time. And I have a friend in France, Alain Kerzenkouf, who is a physician, and he's also a Hitchcock scholar.
Oh yeah, I know him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do you know Alain? He's a wonderful.
Not personally, but I know his books, like the Forgotten Hitchcock, right?
Yes, the Forgotten Hitchcock. Yes, I met him in France. We took a trip to France, and we met him and his wife, and we had lunch together. His English is about as good as my French, but we managed to communicate. But he did like my approach. In fact, I think I used in the Psycho book, I think I used a reminiscence of seeing Psycho for the first time. But I tried to get people who weren't, traditionally in the humanities to comment on the book, to say, you're on the right track here, or you're not on the right track. And I did listen to them. So, so that, I think that helped.
Yeah, I have two more questions. One of them is about doubles, which are so central to Shadow of a Doubt and to Strangers on a Train that you also describe in that chapter. But I know that this is not the end of your, let's say, adventure with doubles. You recently told me about the discovery of that the double of Janet Leigh in Psycho is still alive and
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Marley
your
Ren-
Hitchcock adventure continues in a way.
Yes. Well, the discovery of Marley Renfrew is a long story, and I'll try to make it brief. When I talked to Terry Williams, who was George Tomasini's assistant on Psycho, he told me the story of the outtakes of Psycho being thrown away by a guy who was an assistant to an assistant editor. He didn't know what he was doing, and he took the outtakes and he threw them away because they get stripped from the silver nitrate would be stripped from the outtakes and then reused. So it wasn't that they were just thrown away. But Terry, Terry fired the guy, and we lost all the great material from the shower scene, the outtakes. But Terry Williams, as I was talking to him, went into his bedroom, came out with a little envelope, and in it was a strip of work print of a scene that was deleted from the film. And that's the body double of Janet Leigh, Marley Renfrew, slumped over the bathtub with her buttocks exposed. And I said, how, and of course, he didn't own the rights to the film. Universal Studios owned the rights to the film. How can I get this into my book without violating copyright? And I'm not going to tell you how I did it, but I did it. But that got me interested in Marley Renfrew, and of course the book, The Girl in Hitchcock's Shower, is about Marley Renfrew. So I eventually found out where she was living and got in touch with her and sent her a still of her backside, and I sent her a copy of the book. But she was Janet Leigh's body double, and it's funny when I interviewed Janet Leigh. And Janet Leigh was a little bit, she wasn't defensive, but she was terse and didn't want to give up a lot of information because she didn't really understand what critics were trying to do with this film. She couldn't understand it. But anyway, she insisted that she was that almost all the shots in the film were of her. And even Joe Stefano, the screenwriter, said he couldn't understand why Janet would say that. But anyway, there was another woman there who was Marley Renfrew, who was in the more daring nude shots of the brief stabbing scene. And it's funny, not only was there a double for Janet Leigh in the shower, there was a double for Anthony Perkins, the mother, Norma Bates, stabbing. That wasn't Tony Perkins, as you know. It was, and I can't remember the actress's name. It was somebody else dressed up like him. So it was a woman dressed up to be a man, to be Tony Perkins, who was dressed up to be his mother. Now you figure that one out. Now we're in triples now. We're no longer in doubles. But Hitchcock loved the idea of doubles, and it's a long literary theme. There are doubles in Dostoevsky. There are doubles in Western literature throughout. So I think he was drawing on that. But what better way to say we have a dual nature? I mean, you can find it in Judaism, Christianity. We are, light and dark. And I think Hitchcock capitalized on that by making them separate characters, sometimes separate scenes that connect together. separate locations, well, all kinds of things, and it gives an internal structure to the film, to a scene, but to the film itself. And that's why Shadow of a Doubt, I think, I mean, it's loaded with these doubles, and the doubles shift, and they shift positions and so forth.
That's true. And I was thinking about this depiction of American small towns or suburbs. And of course, you may point to the whole tradition of suburban cinema. But I was thinking about David Lynch when I was reading your book. Probably also because if you saw the third season of Twin Peaks, then there is this episode with an atomic bomb, which is pretty amazing. And I was thinking about Blue Velvet, and I was wondering if we also could kind of use these metaphors that you propose of dark energy to, for example, speak about this film. And of course, many great directors were inspired by Hitchcock, but actually I've never asked you if you consider David Lynch
to me,
talented disciple of Hitchcock.
The scene that to me epitomizes Lynch's Hitchcockian influence is in Blue Velvet, where the kid is mowing the lawn, and in this beautiful, sort of suburban setting, and down inside the leaves of grass, Walt Whitman, the leaves of grass is an ear that he finds. And I thought Hitchcock would love a scene like that, because here you have this small town, and on the surface it seems fine, but underneath in the grass, who knows how many, and you could walk out into nature and enjoy nature and sit under a tree. Do you know, maybe there are bodies buried under there? How many skeletons are under that tree? How much rot is, underneath the surface of the earth. So, yeah. And I think David Lynch, this is his universe. I think Lynch's humor is darker than Hitchcock's humor. Not in Frenzy. Frenzy, I think, is Hitchcock losing his sense of balance, in my opinion, and losing his sense of humor. I think there's some humor in that film, but the film is dark in a David Lynch sense, So I think Lynch is influenced by Hitchcock, yes, but I think I think he's way more cynical in the way he sees things, because even in Shadow of a Doubt, Uncle Charlie is defeated, and little Charlie is saved, but the world is still ready to spin out of control. But at that particular moment, it's ordered, but it's always ready to. And if you look at the world the way it is, and I don't want to lecture about this, but the world is always ready to spin out of control. We're seeing it now with Russia and Ukraine.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning that, because we are recording this podcast. I mean, me and Michał in Poland. So as we always say, we try to bring this Eastern European perspective on Alfred Hitchcock. And yeah, we definitely feel that menace that is not far away from our border, actually.
Yeah,
right?
I'm worried about. Well, of course, we're all worried here with this guy who's has all this power, and he has all this enmity against the West, and he wants to get back at the West for destroying the Soviet Union. He's a dark character. There's no question of it, and he could, through his own actions, spin the world out of control, and it's frightening. So it can happen in a little small town. It happens inside human beings who go out and kill a whole bunch of people for who knows what reason. It's a scary world, and it's always ready to become even scarier. And I think Hitchcock knew that. He knew that about himself, and he knew that about the world, and I think he puts it in his films. But he always had hanging over his head the production code, especially in England and in the United States. And he didn't have the freedom that Lynch has in portraying certain kinds of things, because he had a censoring organization that didn't let him get away with a lot of stuff. And the double was a good way. The double was a good way of getting around the hurdle of the production code, because he could suggest things by hooking them together, scenes together, characters together, without doing something explicit until Psycho. Then that was different.
That's a great point. And so my very last question about dark energy, because when you finish a book, it's done. You may maybe expand it later on in one of the future editions. But my question is, you published this book in 2013, right? Almost 10 years ago. Did you think about this topic after that? Did you discover something more about dark energy as a term? What happened within these 10 years since the publication of this book?
Well, I was kind of disappointed that it didn't have a bigger impact on cinema studies. Not that I thought it was a great book. I thought it was an interesting, challenging book. But I did get a review in a Hitchcock annual that was, I think, a pretty good review. But generally, it didn't have an impact, and so I was a little disappointed about it. But I think I continue to think that dark energy is a good way of. I mean, first of all, it's a scientific thing. We don't know what it is. We don't know. People know how it works, but we're not exactly sure what it is, and we continue to find out more things about it. But I think it's still a good way to look at things, and I think we need to blend science and technology with art, and especially with cinema, in more creative ways than we have been doing. I don't know how else to say it, other than I'm not bitter or anything that the book didn't have a greater impact. I don't think people understood what I was trying to do. And I was reading it over this morning, and some of it is a little bit on the heavy side. Maybe it was a little too challenging in ways. It was challenging to write. And in fact, I used to lie awake at night saying, oh my God, why did I take on this project? I'm glad I did, but I don't know if I'd do it again the way I did it back then. I don't know if anybody would even publish a book like this now.
No, but I'm one of the readers that really that this book is important for. So I understand your concerns as an author, but you have at least one reader that was really challenged by this book, and it really opened my eyes to many issues. So
thank you. Well, continue on. Pick up something.
Yeah, I will. I am really happy that we could talk about dark energy, and I think it will be a great part of our talk about this movie, that we can see it through your eyes, your eyes that are interested in both Hitchcock and cinema and science, and this is really great.
And I think we're in the midst of a major scientific breakthrough in this James Webb telescope, which is going to look into light. And we didn't talk about light, but light is the essence of cinema, as you know. This telescope is going to be able to look at light that left the universe 13.8 billion years ago and see what the universe was like back then when it was first forming. To me, this is the most astounding. Here we have people arguing about whether they ought to wear masks or get vaccines while we're in the midst of the most astounding scientific discoveries of all time. So I'm thinking, how can we possibly talk about duality? How can we possibly look at this and say, isn't that wonderful? While at the same time question the basic science of medicine down here on Earth. You know, talk about duality. I think Hitchcock would have a lot of fun. He's shaking his head saying, this is so absurd, I couldn't make a movie about this. But anyway, so we have to pay attention to science. And I do believe, I don't know if it was Stephen Hawking who said it or Leonard Mlodinow, that philosophy has given up dealing with the big questions. The big questions are now being dealt with by science, and the nature of existence, the nature of reality, all of those things are now scientific things. Philosophy is mired in technicalities, and it's not my thought. It's what he said, but I agree with it. Honestly, we need to look at science. It tells us a lot about the world.
So it's a great conclusion, I think, to our talk. So thank you very much for being our guest today. It was great.
My pleasure.
Talking with you.
Well, I think, Sebastian, you asked the most wonderful questions. Some of them I answered okay, and some of them I had to think about a lot, and I think I wandered all over the place. But you let me. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know you're going to do important work, and I will listen to your other podcasts, honestly, because now you've got me back interested in cinema again. I just wrote a book on grammar, on standard written American English, and I'm writing another book on writing errors.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, hey, why am I over here? Maybe I should be over here. So maybe I'm going to go back into Hitchcock. I'll write that Windows.
That's a great idea. So thank you again.
Wow, that was a great conversation. I really liked it. Full disclosure, I wasn't a part of it, so I listened to it now. It was fantastic. So congratulations, Sebastian, and I wish that we will have more guests like this in the future. And well, what can I say? This is our longest episode, but also a film that we really had the need to talk about. So please follow us, please share this episode. We are doing this for you and for Hitchcock fans everywhere. And just one technical note, I need to finally say it because I want to say it every single time, but I forget, is that we are doing this podcast together and it's our joint baby, but I want to stress that Sebastian is carrying the technical burden of really 90% of what's being done here in terms of editing, production. He generously took this role upon himself, so I want to go on record as thanking him on the show. So thank you, Sebastian, for doing this. And please follow Foreign Correspondence,
Deeper into Hitchcock.